Now you'll notice that I stretched it this direction. Well, now if I go to the top view of this object, you can see it's not stretched at all, going, from this is where the front of the object is down here, and the back of the object. So now, if I wanted to stretch it this way, it's relative to the position I'm looking at the object. So since I'm now looking at the top view, and if I do stretch, it'll now allow me to stretch it that direction. So now, if I rotate this, you'll see that I've stretched it in that direction as well. So it's relative to the position you're looking at the object. So I'm going to go back to the front view. Now some of the other ones, there's a lot of distortion effects here. You have things like belly. Belly is basically bulges out of the center of the object, and this can, or goes back inward, and this can be done to any object in your scene. So even if you had text, you could do this to text, 3D text. You could do this to whatever type of object you've got. So another one is bend. Bend is quite useful, and this really shows how it works in relation to how your view is. Bend always pivots around the base of your view. So if I were to click and drag, you can see that it's bending around the base down there. If I were to look at this from a different view, like look at it from the top view and do a bend, you're going to see it trying to bend around that base down there. So you'd have to rotate your object into the position you need it to be, so that when you bend it, it'll bend in the right position. Now you'll notice also over here that there are these edit buttons next to some of the procedures. So if I go ahead and say, for example, with the spikes, and click edit, there will be options for me to change the parameters of the spikes. So for example, if I said, I want this to be 12 spikes instead of 4. Now when I click on spikes and actually start to do this, you can see I'm getting a whole lot more spikes on my object. And there you go. So anytime you see edit, that allows you to edit what that particular function is going to be able to do. Flatten's a really nice feature. This allows you to actually, as if you're pushing a wall straight in on your object. So as I start to push, you can see it start to flatten the front end of the object. So if I were to rotate this, you can see I've just pushed right in and flattened the surface. Now, say there's a different type of flatten you can do, just like edit. Since it has an edit command, you can actually edit it. So I want to do a spherical flatten, which just will allow me to flatten off the tips of the spikes. So now I can flatten those spikes in and get kind of this bumpy sort of golf ball-like surface. Well, kind of the inverse of a golf ball, actually. So by mixing and matching, what you do in your effects can allow you to do different types of things. So giving you different types of effects of things you can do to your objects. The last thing I'd like to talk about in effects, let me undo this, is the paint effects that you can do inside here. And with the paint effects, this little white box that you see next to the different paint effects, the white box allows you to create a color that you're going to use to do the effect with. And so if I choose, like, let's just choose like a red here. Now if I change that to a red and then I go ahead and select paint clouds, what this does is as I click and drag, it's going to slowly fade up, kind of a cloud pattern blended with the underneath color, using the red color on top to kind of blend over the top of the current paint. So you can do some patterns on the surface of your object. So like, for example, with marble, let's make this one a green. With marble, it'll do a marble pattern. Now you can see that the veins are the underlying color that shows through. Veins does the opposite. It'll actually, the veins themselves will be the color that you use. So if I choose a color here, You can see that the veins are now the color that you're using, as opposed to the veins being where the color is showing through. Noise is similar to clouds, except a little bit tighter pattern, a little bit more of a dense pattern. So you can use this to kind of paint, mixed with your paint tools, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Mixed with your paint tools, you can get a variety of effects on the surface paint of your object. Paint material allows you to take a material that you've made by placing image maps and that sort of thing and create it into paint, which I will cover in the materials section a little bit later. Finally, something I should mention is that rotate inside of effects, and rotate and bank up here at the top will actually rotate the object within its axis. So let me show you this with an example here. I'm going to let me just go ahead and create a box so you can see the rotation here. Now, there's a difference between rotating your object here in Composer and actually positioning and rotating your object here, and rotating and positioning your object with inside effects. So if I were to rotate this here inside effects, let me go ahead and go to front view. This is my front view, and as you can see, I'm looking dead center onto that, like onto the front of that object. Now, if I were to modify this object by rotating it, it's actually modifying the axis for this object is still directly up, like straight, but it is rotated on its own axis. So, for example, the best way to show this is that when it's on its own axis, and Y is going straight up through the center here, Z is coming this way, and X is going this direction. So if I go to scale this object inside the Composer here, I'll go ahead and say, okay, I want to just scale it on the Y. So if I go ahead and go to scale, you can see that it is following its Y axis. Well, the interesting thing is that if I come into effects and rotate it with inside effects, now what's happening is that my axis is still going straight up through here. So if I were to scale this now, you'll see that its axis is been skewed. And that's what the purpose for effects rotate is to be able to change where your axis point is on your object. It's able to rotate your object so that your axis is not in the same place it was before. So don't get confused when you start to rotate objects. If you rotate an object inside effects, it's not going to be the same as rotating it in Composer. So to conclude, effects is where you would use distortions to modify your object, whether it be bends or distorts of some type, to be able to quickly change your object to get different results.